Hello and welcome back. This is Professor Plyman, and today we're going to be talking about dissecting an argument. So let's start with, what is an argument? An argument is a position or claim that a writer is putting forth, essentially something that they want you to believe or agree with or buy into. An argument can be put forth in text, in image, in art, or even spoken language. And typically when one puts forth an argument, they assume a basic prior knowledge of the audience. So for example, if I'm going to give an argument about immigration, I'm going to expect that you have sort of a basic level knowledge of what is immigration, how does immigration affect our country, that sort of stuff. Now let's talk about bias. Pretty much any time you have an argument, you are going to have some level of bias. So bias is present when an argument is presented in a way that intentionally favors one side over the other. And bias can be the result of malicious motives. Maybe they're not telling you the whole story. Sometimes it can be maybe like a lack of knowledge or experience. Maybe they don't know the whole story, but sometimes it's just simply that they believe very strongly that their point is the best, and they have a difficult time seeing or understanding the other perspective. And we see bias in all sorts of things. You can see it in the language that an author uses, the evidence that they choose to present, even text comparisons, how they compare the two things in the text, as well as in assumptions that an author makes about who you are or what you believe or what is right or what a good person thinks. All of those can be examples of places where we might find bias. Now, there are some parts of an argument that I want you to be aware of. There's the claim, the reason, the support, and the warrant, and we're going to talk about each of these. So a claim is the overall belief or viewpoint that the author wants you to share. So let's talk about how you analyze the claim. The first thing that I want you to do is really ask yourself, what is the claim that this author is making? And sometimes it's very easy to see. Right off the bat, we can clearly pinpoint this is what the author believes, or this is what the author is trying to get me to believe. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. You kind of have to dig in and really figure out what exactly is it that they are trying to convince me of. The next thing I want you to do is really look at whether or not the claim is backed up by credible evidence. And we talked about evaluating sources in a previous lecture, but I want you to think about the evidence that they used. Is it factual? Is it working? And is it actually proving their point? And then the next thing that I want you to look at is whether or not the claim is based on assumptions. A lot of times you will hear or read things that say like every moral person would agree. That's an assumption, right? Maybe somebody disagrees but still has, morality. A lot of times they are working off the fact that, if somebody says every good person would agree, we all want to feel like good people, right? So we're like, oh, maybe everybody else feels this way. A lot of times those assumptions in claims can change the impact of the delivery. Then here's where you're going to look at the evidence. Who wrote this evidence? Who created this evidence? What is their area of expertise? Look at when this evidence was created. Is the information current given the topic? And I say given the topic because that matters. If you're arguing about something in Hamlet, it doesn't really matter if your evidence is from the 1800s or 2022 or 1690, because Hamlet has been around since 1604, and we've been analyzing it since then. We haven't made any new Hamlet discoveries, right? It's still the same piece of literature that we're analyzing. But if you're looking at something in medicine or technology or space exploration or politics or sometimes even like the law, maybe 1 year ago is out of date for that information. Look at the source. Where does this information come from? Is this publication or source well known or respected in its industry? There's a huge difference in news that we're getting from source A versus news that we're getting from source B. Think about the source overall. Look at, was the evidence peer reviewed? This is not a fail-safe. Not everything that is peer reviewed is 100% correct, but it is much more likely to be accurate if it is peer reviewed. But once again, this is just one element of the way that we are evaluating evidence. And then the last thing that I really want you to think about is the evidence relevant to the claim that the author is making? A lot of times there's a great statistics that is super surprising or shocking, and it, sort of punches you in the chest and you're like, wow, I didn't know that. But when we really stop to think about it, it doesn't actually prove the point. And I'll give you an example. I was reading an article dealing with Houston ISD, and they were talking about test scores in different schools within Houston Independent School District. And one of the things that they were saying is that the test scores in certain schools that were in where the majority of the students were low income had younger teachers, and those test scores were lower than schools that were in more affluent neighborhoods, which typically had teachers that had been teaching for longer. And so the point that this article was making was that newer teachers produced lower test scores. And the statistics were pretty surprising. But it didn't actually prove the claim that they were making, because we know, based on years and years and years of research and evidence, that the number one predictor for a student's success is the income of their parents, not the school that they go to. So they had evidence, but their evidence didn't actually prove their claim. So here's where you're going to have to really think critically, analyze, get in there, and decide, is the evidence actually relevant to the claim that the author is making? And sometimes the answer is no. And here's where we have to dig a little bit more into the background, figure out what the author is saying, what the author isn't saying, and why the author is, presenting that particular bias. The other thing that I really want you to look at is there enough evidence? Did the author give you enough to prove their point? And a lot of times the answer to this is no. Sometimes there just isn't enough evidence yet, and we don't know whether or not something will work until we try it. Sometimes authors intentionally ignore pieces of evidence to make their argument sound better. So here's some big questions that I want you to think about. How does it benefit the author if I accept their claim? What do they get out of this? Think about this. How does it benefit me if I accept the author's claim? Does it benefit me at all? And how does this claim reflect upon my personal worldview or belief system? As we are dissecting arguments and really processing whether or not we agree with these claims, these questions can help us understand what is happening and whether or not this is something that we want to buy into. If you have questions about dissecting arguments, we're going to work on this together in our online classroom, so you can ask them there. And of course, you can always reach out to me. I'm always happy to help.